Good morning, everyone. That's good. This is the Art and Law and Technology talk, in case you might be in the wrong room. We're happy you're all here. My name is Dave Ratner, and we are really fortunate to have this panel presented by Colorado Attorneys for the Arts. So I'm going to let Meredith Badler, to my right, just explain Colorado Attorneys for the Arts. You do have a couple attorneys up here, but we'll try to be nice. And then we can get the panel started. So, Meredith.
Thanks, Dave. Hi. As Dave mentioned, I'm Meredith Badler, Program Director at the CBCA, which is the Colorado Business Committee for the Arts. We do a lot of things at CBCA to connect arts and business across the state of Colorado. One of those many things that we're here talking about is our Colorado Attorneys for the Arts program, or CAFTA is the very beautiful acronym that we use for it. And CAFTA is a legal referral service that connects income-qualified artists, cultural nonprofit organizations, and creative businesses with pro bono legal services. So we essentially serve as a matchmaker between artists and very wonderful volunteer attorneys who are willing to give their legal time and expertise to help artists on arts-related legal matters. That can be copyright registration, drafting contracts, reviewing a lease on a studio space, forming your creative business. These are all things that we help artists with on a regular basis. In addition to that, we do workshops and presentations all over the state. We were just in Fort Collins last month and Colorado Springs before that. We'll be in Carbondale in October and Steamboat in September, Denver in June, and any other time you want to invite us to your community, we will come. We will bring one of our lawyers or a few of them, and we will share some information. So that's what we're here in part doing today. Please keep CAFTA in mind for when you need us. I have some very handy cards that have our website on them, so you don't forget about us. But one of the things we get asked about all the time at this intersection of art and law is, what does that look like in our digital age? So that was the genesis of this panel and what we wanted to talk about, sort of what that looks like, art and law and technology. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dave, who will introduce our panelists, and we'll have a really fantastic conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Meredith. ColoradoAttorneysForTheArts.org, by the way, is that website. So ColoradoAttorneysForTheArts.org, definitely a great way to find those resources. Basically the genesis, like Meredith said, for this is something that comes up pretty regularly for the attorneys that work with the artists through CAFTA. Just kind of getting a feel for the room. How many in the room are artists? Great, awesome. How many are from creative districts? Cool. Any presenters or promoters? Okay, great. Any attorneys in the room? See, we need to know this, so someone's watching, okay? So I am an attorney. I run a law firm called Creative Law Network. I am also a recovering band manager, recovering tour manager. In my former life, I spent many years on the road doing that type of stuff, and it really informed me on how the artistic process works, how the creative process works, but more importantly, what artists need to go through to get their art out there. And that was decades ago when I was on the road. We didn't have these fancy little things in our computers in our pockets, and it's changed a lot. And so what we're going to do today is we've got three amazing artists on the panel here, and going to let everybody introduce themselves, show a little multimedia for your viewing pleasure, and then just talk about these things. Basically, we are going to talk about the creative process, creative production, how technology has affected the creative process, as well as distribution of art and how the technology has affected the distribution process, and pepper that in with the legal aspects of that as well. So so we're going to start. I will just basically, the other thing is this is being videoed for posterity and other things, and so That's why we have these microphones. You could probably hear us otherwise. And if you have questions, please raise your hand, ask questions. We'll just have to repeat them into the microphone so that everything can be recorded. So, Laura, you want to start off and give your intro? I will switch to some videos for you. But you can talk first.
Yeah.
This is the first.
Hi, my name is Laura Hyunji Kim, and I am a multimedia artist, mostly working with video, performance, and new media tools. And so I'm very interested in everyday technology and things we use to record our lives and how that influences our behaviors. So such as like a lot of my work is shot on my cell phone and using post-production tools that are widely available. Let's say the same tool could be used for recording your child's like birthday, but then I also employ that and use it for my artwork. So it gets really blurry as of whether my work is art or not. And has seen as that for a while. And so I thematically research a lot about art, technology, and science and the cross-disciplinary aspects of that, often filtering and remixing it with the kind of everyday online content that people generate online, and kind of see how that all circulate within popular culture, mainstream culture, and beyond. And so the first piece, I want to show you a series of different pieces. The first piece is called Better, Brighter, Bolder Future. I moved to Boulder last year, and it's kind of riffing off of the conversations I've heard from other people, and also just being in a new environment coming from San Francisco. And so look at these trees, they've been here forever. Look at these knees, they've been climbing hills whenever. Down on the street, let's see child schemes, telling me to be bolder, bolder, I wanna be bolder. Birds back to this world, tell me be bolder. 4 seasons in 1 day, I be bolder. Friday night, the only one outside to be bolder. And so that's more of a, kind of riff on everyday living and just interacting with people and being inspired by it. I think we could actually show a different one, Sharing is Caring.
Sure.
And so that's more of like original soundtrack and imagery. This piece is called Sharing is Caring, and so I've been very much interested in, a lot of my work exists on social media and talks about it while existing on it, and therefore a lot of the content comes from remixing a lot of the things that I see and how people interact with it. And so for this piece, I kind of like look through my friends' feeds and status updates and source lyrics through it, and then also a lot of the internet GIFs and memes that were circulating around that time that was very topical. And so, watch that. until it goes down this rabbit hole of like repost, recycle, blah, blah, share. And so this is a most recent project. One of the most recent projects I've been working on, which exists totally on Instagram. And I call it Consume Like Everyone Is Watching. And if we scroll down a little bit, I wanted to show a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more.
I should just let you drive.
A little bit more, a little bit more. Oh, there's a lot there. One more. Scroll down. Okay, so I'll keep it right there.
Okay.
And so, how many of you are familiar with mukbang, the social media phenomenon? Okay, you're nodding. So it's a Korean social media fad where people are posting themselves eating massive amounts of food and amplify the sound through microphones. And so I found that really interesting, and so I also was interested in how like the mundane act of eating, and eating alone in front of a camera can become so entertaining when it's posted online. And so I'm using that format, adding a little bit more popular music and dance to it, and writing about extensively, unlike a lot of social media status updates, about the whole like history of the food itself or the consumable I'm using. And so we could watch that one.
This one?
Yep. And I've been dancing.
Friends at the table doing shots, tripping fast and then we talk slow. And you come over and start up a conversation with just me, and trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop it, and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. And I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room, and now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. Well, I'm in love with your body. I'm in love with your body. Friends at the table doing shots.
Yep, so as you can see, a lot of my work is very lo-fi, very easy production tools, and that's probably the angle as of where I'm coming from in this panel.
And you want to tell us why you moved to Boulder, what you're doing now?
Oh, yeah. So I started a PhD program at CU Boulder called Intermediate Art, Writing, and Performance, and so I'm going to be here for next foreseeable many years.
For future CCI Summits. Awesome. Thanks, Laura. So next is Aaron Holstein, who obviously is going to have a different take on things.
Hi, Aaron Holstein here. I'm a musician and an independent filmmaker and a general creative person, and I teach music production at Naropa University. And I'm a dad and lots of other fun things. But I have the last 2 years slowed down my touring, music touring schedule, and have been making more video and more kind of recording in my studio more than I have been touring. But prior to that, I've been on tour for the last 20 years, on and off, but it's roughly about 3,000 shows around the world, mostly by myself. I've put out, over 15 albums under my own various names and produced another 10 for other groups, and I've have a passion for all kinds of music. I play guitar and piano and sing and drums, but I'm probably best known at this point for producing electronic music called Vibe Squad. And I toured around the world for 10 solid years doing just that. So now I'm focusing a little more on home-based parenting / doing art from my home studio, making films, making music for films. I just finished my first ambient / new classical record that's very different than anything I've done in the past, which has been a little louder and more kind of for a nightclub atmosphere. So I just made a really chill record and a couple videos for that. One of them I'll show you right now. And so I try to keep my creative output varied for my own interest, I like to do a lot of different things, so I try to just keep as many plates spinning as possible with all these creative projects, and use as much computer technology as I can, because I do it all myself. So obviously I need that support. That's the quietest thing I've ever done. Most of it's pretty rowdy, actually, so that was a big departure for me.
Do you want
Yeah,
to,
this one is definitely the other direction.
do you want to do the tide pool instead?
No, that's I'm
Okay.
fine with the.
Okay, let's see if we can get to load.
This video was super fun to make in my bathtub with a $20 investment in toys from Into the Wind from Boulder down on Pearl Street. Just like went in and grabbed as many little like bouncy balls as things that would go make chaos happen in a slow motion environment. So I put a camera in my bathtub and then pressed start on a 240 frame per second film and just dumped a whole bunch of junk in the tub, and then took the best scenes and edited them to the music. So I go for the least budget as I can, as I can make it by on, but try to get the highest production values out of that as that I can, and spend a lot of time, with video, with lighting and stuff like that, because that's, time I can spend without spending any more money. And with music, I tend to do the same thing with microphones, and yeah, you can play that one a little bit.
Okay.
So there's some underwater stuff right there, and original music as well. So that was a $60 GoPro cheap copy camera underwater on the end of a $10 stand on a vacation with my family in California. So it's just fun. One of my favorite things is just to try to gather as much stuff as I can without having some company backing me or a lot of budget, not letting that be my excuse why I can't kind of do a wide variety of stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
And Justin Conrad.
Hello. My name's Justin Conrad. I am, it's a little intimidating to sit on this panel and be called an artist next to these guys. I'm more the combination of Dave and the artists, I guess, and then I'm an attorney for my day job. I work at a firm called Hutchinson Black & Cook in Boulder, where I work with entertainment law, copyright, trademarks, and I work with a lot of bands, management, record labels, publishing, in the music world, as well as film and literary publishing, and the occasional modeling contract. And then in the other part of my life, I'm a professional bluegrass musician. I play dobro. And I, before becoming a lawyer, was a recording engineer and producer. I do have a Grammy on my wall from one recording I worked on. And so I did that for about 10 years before getting into the law world. So I guess I'm the crossover guy here. I don't have any interesting multimedia footage to put up here, and the stuff I did send didn't make it across the ether, so you'll just have to trust me that I can, in fact, play music, and I am, in fact, a lawyer.
I can vouch for you.
Yeah, Dave will vouch for
I'll
me.
vouch for you on that. No, I definitely, it's unfortunate we put you last. You would have been much more impressive before all the video, but
Yeah, I know.
we can also vouch for him being a great musician, so.
I should
all
have
these
brought my
things are true.
dobro, and then I could have just gotten up and played something, but
Also true. But thanks. Definitely, I mean, part of the idea of this initial kind of intro is give everybody an idea of all the different things that we're doing and how different things are than they used to be. And so, like I said, what I think we'll do is we'll first talk about the creative process and how technology is affecting that, and then talk about the distribution process and how technology is affecting that. So I'm just curious, especially after kind of seeing what you guys just did, just briefly, your creative process, what technology you use, if you're using other people's works in your process, and we can just go online or however you guys want to handle it. Not particular.
Sharing link. So I kind of briefly talked about my creative process, but to talk more in depth about it, so I said I shoot a lot of my videos on my phone, and I use a lot of like green wallpaper or like some sort of like portable green-ish looking piece of cloth as a green screen. And so it's very very intuitive. Like I don't really plan super ahead until I actually go into the making part, because I think through making, and that's, I think, for me, is the best way to keep going forward. And so in that regards, like because I'm influenced so much by my surrounding and people around me, I of course use a lot of content that I see online too, because that's a lot of where the derives happen, where I'm like wandering around and just, oh, that's a really interesting video, going down the rabbit hole, and getting to know certain, or looking at a clickbait advertisement image and being super inspired by that one, like, yeah, like lose weight in like 3 days, amazing. And so those kind of triggers, like whether I'm aware or not, I believe is remixed into my work. And so sometimes those remixes happen more apparently so you can identify the source material. Sometimes it would be more like subconscious, or in a way where it gets infused and it's in the final work, but not necessarily visually evident. And so that's the way it kind of work. And in terms of, do I talk about distribution too? Or, I mean, I guess I'm jumping ahead, but I'll just stop there.
Okay.
So that's my process, and I'll talk more about it as we progress our discussion.
Cool. I basically have computers and musical instruments set up all over my house. and have worked that out with my wife to compartmentalize it in so that it doesn't get in her way. But I have one office that's set up for recording music on one computer and video on another. I think I have 4 computers in that room, and I've got 6 or 7 guitars, and the walls are all keyboards and speakers and wires, and everything's all in big giant tool chests for all my camera gear and my music gear. And so I'm a huge geek for this stuff. And in the basement, I've got drums and turntables and 1,000 records or so, and just blah, blah, blah. So I'm a hoarder of creative tools, and I like the cheapest ones I can get my hands on usually, because growing up, there was a real boundary to what I could do if I didn't get a record deal, or if I wasn't considered, mainstream real musician. Then I was relegated to amateur equipment and not real performances and that type of thing. But as the digital age came about and computer distribution, MP3s changed everything for me personally, because I went from being dependent on joining a band and having some management, A&R people, record label people appreciate what I was doing first before I was allowed to share with the world my stuff, to shortcutting that straight down to I make music in my room that can compete with the high-end production values of expensive studios, and then I can send that straight to the listener if I can figure out, the social construction of where those people hang out and stuff like that. So that I kind of utilized a lot of that technological change to both improve my creative output and then to figure out a way to interface with the listener or the viewer without having to go through the big business model machine that was really the only way to do it when I was a kid. I'm 46, so I kind of went from 8 tracks and cassettes and vinyl records to CDs to MP3s to now back to vinyl records again and all that kind of stuff. But so just to go back to the workflow really quickly, I try to get my hands on musical instruments as much as I can all day long. I play piano and drums and sing and all kinds of stuff all day. Make music, make video, a big camera collection and a bunch of stuff like that. So I'm just always doing creative things and trying to make them fit into my my livelihood and try to earn a living from those things by figuring out how in a small niche way to do what I do, but get it out using digital technology.
So I want to address this from 2 different hats here, from where I'm sitting. So my professional bluegrass musician hat and recording engineer hat, the bluegrass technology hasn't advanced too much. Mandolins and dobros and banjos are fairly similar to what they always were. But the recording technology is really interesting because I started out, as I said, as a recording engineer, and I worked on a console, a mixing desk, bigger than this table. It's a Euphonics digital board. It's super cool, sounded amazing. Big racks of gear, and now when I record my bands or projects I'm working with, I bring a little interface this big and I plug it into a laptop. And the microphones haven't changed. The microphones are still a big part of the process. But other than that, I have like the same power and arguably the same sound quality that I had in this enormous studio, like half the size of this room, completely full of gear, now on my laptop, which is a pretty huge change. I played a show a couple of weeks ago in Lyons at this concert series, and I noticed that the sound guy for live sound was using distressors and LA2As and Pultecs and all this like really high-end gear, plug-in versions of them on the computer, which is like, this is stuff that like never would have, you don't bring an LA2A out with you to a live gig, like the thing's worth like $4,000, in one little box. But he had plugins that were emulating it, and this is what he was using on a live show. And I thought that was fascinating, that we had that sound quality now coming through a live gig, and not just in the studio. So that's my musician artist hat. The lawyer hat, it's really interesting hearing how you guys work, because a lot of my clients, I work with people like you guys who come in, and oftentimes my role in the creative process is they'll come in and sit down and say, okay, here's what I've done. Am I going to get in trouble for this? And especially in the kind of stuff that Laura does, like there's a huge minefield there, because you're working with a lot of existing material. And you know this because you get letters from people complaining about it, or you get YouTube taking your videos down, saying this infringes. And with that sort of thing, and then in Aaron's world, I think maybe some samples, but also people will come in, they play their own music, but they'll say, I used a snippet of a song, or this is inspired by a chorus from this tune, or I took the lyrics from this thing that I heard. Or once in a while, they don't know they did it, and I say, I've heard that phrase before, and then it turns out that they either didn't realize they did it or didn't think anyone would notice, and subconsciously took something from a song that I had heard. And so oftentimes I'm in the role of helping them figure out the legal term is fair use, is this is something that is copyrighted by someone else, or I should say they own the copyright in it. You don't have to actually register a copyright to own it, you just have to create it. And so if someone else owns the copyright in this, where are the lines here? Can I, because if I said to Laura, I'm sorry, you can't use anything that's copyrighted, my hunch is that would not be a good answer for you to hear.
Yeah, I would not want to hear.
Yeah, and then I wouldn't get paid, and it would be terrible for everyone. It's oftentimes the role there is to try to figure out where the fuzzy gray boundaries are, and that's something that's evolved with technology, because it's so easy now to grab stuff off the internet, to walk around. If I walk around downtown and I'm recording conversations I pass, well, can I use those conversations? Am I violating someone's right of privacy? Am I potentially violating a right of publicity? Do they own a copyright in what they say? I mean, this sort of stuff is what comes up every day. I don't think these issues were nearly as prevalent 20 years ago, when collage as an art form or as an element of art was not nearly as useful. You probably remember sampling was the big discussion when it first came up, that everyone was like, well, if I just record, I hear a lot of the time, like, if I use less than 30 seconds, then that's a fair use, right? And the answer is no. That's a myth. There are 4 big factors and then a whole host of smaller factors that courts look at determining whether something is a fair use or not. And so it's a pretty difficult analysis to do as an artist, and one that a lot of artists just don't really want to get involved in. So what happens, they come to me when the creative process is essentially done, and then I get to be the one to tell them, I'm sorry, you may want to blur out that image. Or there was a film where there was a shot panning down like Santa Monica Boulevard in LA, and there was a billboard in the background that had Yoko Ono on it, and the insurance company would not insure the film because of that billboard, because they said Yoko Ono might get mad. And it was like, it's in public, like this is and it wasn't focusing on it just kind of went right past it. This is a pretty clear fair use, but the insurance company said, we don't care. You got to blur that out or replace it with something else because we're worried about liability. So there's the legal side of it, and then there's the business, what's insurable. So I could go on, but that's my lawyer hat take on some of the pitfalls the technology is creating in the creative process.
I thought of one more workflow thing I just wanted to add. Interestingly enough, all I ever wanted as the technology was improving was more of it, because I went from trying to work by myself as a musician, it's frustrating, and so having a drum machine is like a cool thing to have if you don't have a friend that plays drums, So I wanted all of those kind of add-on technological toys. But I've gotten to the point where, like, my most recent record that I made, the classical record, I did it without a computer on purpose. And I recorded in my living room and mic'd up my grand piano and a Rhodes and improvised the whole thing live for 3 days, and then picked the best parts and didn't do anything to them and just put out the record. Because I was just dying to do something like that, because I've been working with technology so much that everything is looking at a screen and working with a timeline. And I actually changed as an artist in a way to conform to these grid lines. And I was feeling a little constrained and feeling like I had hit some kind of creative dead ends with that process. So I actually kind of threw it out for a record and went back to just feeling it 100%, recording what happened and making that the thing, and that's all, and not enhancing it with the technology any further. And that was really cool, and that was a novelty now, because it seems like it's gone so far into the paradigm of, well, you can do all this with computer technology, that it felt old-fashioned to do it that natural way, but the results are totally different, and I'm really happy with the way it came out. It was a good experience. So sometimes the technology can go so far that you just wish it would all go away, and you could get back to playing your dobro and for people's ears, you know?
And this is a problem that comes up in mixing engineering a lot, is it used to be when you mixed an album, you had the raw recorded sounds on the tape, and maybe you'd edit a little bit, but then you've got the tape, and you'd play it through the mixing console, and if you wanted echo, or reverb, or EQ, or any, you know, in the volume levels, you'd perform that live in real time every time. And so if you want to do a cool effect on the guitar, you add it when you're playing it through on the mix take. And you had to commit to it. You were printing it to tape with that sound, and if you didn't quite get it right, well, you live with it. And then maybe later you listen to the album, you're like, oh, that was actually really cool. At the time, I wasn't sure, but yeah, that came out great. Now, you don't have to commit to anything, because the computer has all this processing power that you can have all those effects and mix tricks as part of the mix automated for you. So you're like, I want to get that flanger sounding like this, and you tweak it, and then every time you play the mix back, it automatically does it for you. The result is you never have to commit to anything. Like, up until the moment the album is released, you can be going back saying, you know, maybe that flanger would have been better as a phaser, or maybe actually I should have put an echo on there, you know, whatever you wanted to do. And it messes with your mind as an engineer, because nothing's ever finished. There's like no such thing as finished. And so it's like the George Lucas effect, I call it, that you always want to go back and tinker with stuff.
Infinite possibilities is a curse.
Yeah, it's a curse for creative people, because at some point, you want to just be able to stop and say, okay, I'm done. And I imagine, I'm not a visual artist, I imagine with a painting, you know, it's like knowing when to put the brush down. It's like, no, I could keep going and doing this, and it just sends you down this horrible rabbit hole. And you know, I guess maybe we were spoiled as technology engineers that like, it wasn't physically possible. There was a point at which the brush stopped painting, and you were like, okay, you're done, hope it's good. And
I call finishing music putting a frame around it for that reason, because it's like, if I don't stop and put a frame around this and hang it on the wall, I'm gonna keep tinkering and it's gonna get worse. And so I'm just gonna cut myself off, I'm done, you know, and then I call it put a frame around it. And the same thing happens with film and with authors. I mean, everybody, you just at some point have to put it in the can. Yeah, but I think that is really interesting that you can keep going and going and going, more so with technology.
The Beatles had 4 tracks.
It's like, you know, you would have the audience that finishes the piece for you, right? Especially for digital content. I mean, for net art or works that exist solely on the internet, without the person who's seeing it to finish the loop, the authorship and the agency of the artist kind of dissolves or changes. And so I find that also very interesting hearing from both of you and how I see a piece being finished. Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm really curious, that you guys talked about how, you know, you can do it all in your bedroom, or you can do it all at home, and how that can be really liberating, and that you don't need a record deal or a distribution deal to get your art out there. This makes it so that anybody can make art in a more professional manner, and anybody can distribute it without those gatekeepers. Is that a good thing?
I've been using,
always, you know, I mean.
I think I've been thinking about that a lot personally, just because of the nature of what I make and how I distribute it. And especially, like, I've been using the word self-identified artist more so than just using the word artist, because I've been very hesitant of calling myself an artist until the point where I realized I have no other better ways to talk about who I am without saying that I'm an artist. And so, because there's so much, you know, SoundCloud or Bandcamp or even Instagram, you have digital artists who not necessarily might be traditionally trained or certified to be an artist, but they, you know, they identify as artists. And I do believe, that's just me speaking from my perspective, I think it should be more, I think if you identify as an artist, you are an artist. 3-year-old can be an artist, which is, you know, not the most popular opinion for those in academia especially, but I believe that the whole technology aspect allows you to be more creatively expressive, and it shouldn't be as kept as it is, and therefore I'm more so prone to feel like, no, there must be better ways of how we can frame by protecting everybody's rights and acknowledging it in various ways in terms of how they want to be acknowledged, but at the same time, making sure that there is a fluid conversation about it. So there is because I feel like we're making legal parameters as we're going, right? As we're constantly creating more technology and privacy and data and all those issues. And so I think there is, this is really interesting, and I think more conversation helps because then we get to identify who an artist is or what artists can be and how we can contribute to this very difficult discussion about legal issues.
Yeah. So everyone has this greater opportunity now to be an artist. The democratization of the tools, and just everyone can say they're an artist and become have the ability to share some kind of music or film or art with other people. And I think that's an awesome thing, because why would you only want to see or hear or experience the output of that narrow few that makes it through the gateway of luck and money choices? That would limit, and did limit, what there was for people to choose from. And I feel like there's no accounting for taste, and there's such a wide musical taste, creative taste, what you all enjoy, what is your most passionate thing for you to experience from a viewer, listener, experiencer is going to be totally different. And it's going to be the one thing that, like, you can have so much in common with someone, and then there can be that song and someone's like, you like that song? I'm like, yeah, I love that. It's my favorite song. It's like, ooh, it's almost like a personality test in some kind of strange way, but there's just that many varieties out there. And so I feel like the fact that it's more accessible to more people, and it's not as economically or just in social circles, more people feel empowered to try something. I think we're getting better art as a whole. We're getting more junk too, but I think that we're gonna get more of those people that wouldn't have had a chance, wouldn't have been encouraged, maybe would have been discouraged, coming out and doing amazing things that are totally changing our culture. There's lots of examples now of people putting out films, art, music, all kinds of stuff that those aren't the kinds of people maybe 50 years ago that would have been showcased to everyone. But we all now get to, as consumers, be very specific in our taste and find the thing we like. It doesn't have to be for everybody. We can enjoy it. There's tons more where that came from. And so in that way, it's opened the world for the artist, the consumer, and perhaps the business people in between that are starting to realize you don't have to be Michael Jackson level, Rihanna, to be a legitimate creator and a business to invest in, or all these types of things.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. I agree that the technology profusion has opened the doors for a lot more creation. One thing that I worry about is that the traditional roles, and I'm thinking mostly in the music industry just because that's more where my world is, but the traditional roles existed somewhat for a reason, and they've been corrupted a bit over time, a lot over time, but the general idea was that a lot of artists are really good at their art, but aren't so good at recording themselves, or editing themselves, or distributing themselves, or managing their own careers. And I feel like, and we talked about this in the car a little bit on the way up, that I feel like there's an expectation now that if you want to be an artist, because all the tools are available to you, you can't just be an artist. You have to be an entrepreneur, and you have to be an engineer, because you are expected that if you're a musician, you're going to record yourself. Because why would you pay an engineer, side note, who spent a lot of time honing their craft and learning how to do this stuff, why would you pay them to record you when you could go home and buy a $200 little interface and a $100 mic and do it yourself? Well, my opinion is it's generally not going to come out as well. Like, it's not the music part of it. You may do a great job creating the music, but how's it going to sound recorded? I hear a lot of recordings now, like clients come in and I hear them and I think, I wish this person was in a studio with an engineer who knew what they were doing, and maybe a producer who could help them turn, towards their strengths, and that might help kind of sharpen it to put it to a place where it was kind of more fully realized. So, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I agree. I think there's more stuff getting out there now. But part of me does wonder if it's putting undue pressure on artists to be things that maybe aren't their core competencies. And the other thing is that it has created a situation where it is really easy to get your content out there. I mean, as a filmmaker, you can put everything on YouTube for free. As a musician, you can upload stuff. You can use CD Baby or TuneCore or something and get your stuff on literally every music store. So when I was growing up as a musician, I couldn't get my record into Tower Records. I couldn't get my record into Virgin Records. It was like, that's like, you got to go through a major label. And now it's like, I can be in iTunes. I mean, I can, play kazoo into a mic for 20 minutes and stick that up on iTunes, and the world can access it. So the problem is not access. The problem is, how do I get heard above the noise? And what I'm finding is I'm starting to have more and more clients that are not artists, but are record labels or on the business side who are doing deals, who a lot of them are artists actually that formed their own record label and said, I've got the technology, I can record myself and I can distribute myself now. And a few years into the process, they're coming to me saying, well, it's great, I can get it out there, but it's like I've hit a wall. I don't know how to get past this. And the reason is, they're not publicists, they're not marketers, they don't know how to get connections. How do I get on the late night shows? How do I get in consideration for awards? How do I get bloggers to pay attention to me? A lot of that stuff is really hard without having people in the process involved who that is their art. That's what they do. And so it's interesting, it's shifted the roles in the industry to where it used to be artist, manager, record label, publisher, distribution, and now it's like artist is kind of all that stuff, and then there's like aggregate distribution people and companies that try to get their stuff out there. So it's definitely shifted everyone's roles, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, honestly. I watch documentaries like music in the 70s, and I'm like, I don't know. There's some of that stuff. Some of that was kind of cool how that happened, and that just doesn't happen anymore.
I think the other thing about it all being out there so much is how it is accessible. Actually, Justin, you said this earlier, that there's more legal issues, there's more infringement happening because it's so easy to access and to repurpose other people's work, and the legal boundaries are blurring a little bit. So is that for you? I mean, for you guys in your process, is that a good thing that there's so much out there? You can sample other people's work, or you can use the inspiration of all these. There's so much more out there, and the technology allows you to sample or reuse or repurpose or mash up things so easily.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, the model of where you made money in the 70s off of music was selling records. Concert tickets were to promote record sales. And when you sold a lot of records, that was where the money model for the whole music industry was really based on that. Now, it's selling tickets, it's not selling records. And the big record companies are not making their money off of selling music, they're selling image, and they're packaging, and they're doing all kinds of cross marketing with each other to make some money, but really it comes down to selling tickets. And all the big festivals are crushing it now, and people love to go to live music, and live music has become an industry that knows how to make a lot of money, and ticket prices are through the roof. But selling MP3s, it's chump change. Selling CDs, good luck with that, and really hard to sell the music in the way that we used to. So you end up giving the music away in some kind of way. Even if you're selling it, you're sort of like, I'm breaking even so that I can sell some tickets and build my image, my name, my brand, all these other types of things. So that's shifted very clearly, and I think that's just, I don't know if there's really much, if you could argue against that. Oh no, people are selling just tons of records and not selling, The model I've seen is, if I want to make money as a musician, I got to play live. In order to get gigs, I gotta put out music. And so the motivator for making music that people can download tends to be to get your name out there. It's some sort of a promotional thing. And in some ways, maybe that cheapens the product too, if you're thinking of it as like, oh, I'm just putting this out there so that people know who I am so I can do this other thing. So I just thought I'd put it out, say that, because that's changed my whole, you know, where I get my money from. I was hoping I would be able to funnel that more into selling music and selling licenses, but really selling tickets was where I've made the best money as a musician in my life.
I think for me, what's interesting is for your world and my world, is the idea of like success and measure of success, whether it's monetary or personal. And for me, I'm more so in the non-commercial aspect of art making. It's a lot of it is for me, and I love what I do, and therefore if people love it, that's great. And so that's where like my urge to share comes from. I feel like I have things to say, and if people listen, that's awesome. And so that whole kind of idea of like how do you succeed online? How do you get more views? Like, doesn't really matter to me as much. If I do, that's great. But also that blurring does happen so often because a lot of the like platforms that I use, which is YouTube or Vimeo, if you're a major record label, for instance, that holds the copyright, they can hold you against using their content, even if I'm creating it for fair use or creating a commentary using their music to transform into something else that hopefully is shared with other people in different forms. And so a lot of things that I get filtered for is the use of popular music. And so as Dave did mention, like I get filtered a whole ton, and Justin mentioned too, it's because it's usually filtered through programs and computer systems and that I don't really understand. And I just get a message saying, hey, we're removing this because it's not fair for you to use this music from Beyonce, single ladies, whatnot. But sometimes those tagged labels would be different. Like it would be totally different music that they flagged me for, which wasn't the original music that I used. And so those discrepancies, along with when you see the same music being used in different content and existing online, as a producer or content creator, you get really confused. Like, what are the boundaries that I can cross, and what are those that I should not try to as a, small artist in a big internet world? And so I think those are some of the issues that I have working with kind of getting my work out there and sharing. And also the difficulties with the language that's used when they're trying to talk about fair use. Because I don't know if any of you have been to YouTube Copyright School, which is this animated, super cutesy, but very difficult to understand animation YouTube has. And it's like really jolly. It's kind of like SpongeBob, and like there's Rabbit, the pirate, probably identifying with me. But it's you watch it and you're still not sure, and I still get flagged. And it's I think the human language that needs to be in place in order for producers, even like let's say 3-4-year-olds who are dancing in front of to like a specific music, that could get flagged. And is it fair use or not? And that also gets very blurry. But also that's some of the things that a lot of the lawyers work. Attorneys deal with a lot here and there. And so I think there needs to be more of a clarified delineation between what can be used and cannot be used. And also Google has like image search, which allows you to see if it's what kind of like degree of copyright level you want to choose from. But those often are also very wrong. And so you find, go to open clip art and try to get something and then realize, oh, I can't actually use that. So it gets very confusing. And so I think for me, it's the clarity and at least, boundaries that needs to be blurrier, or at least if it's blurry, some clarification.
I mean, I'll say, selfishly, I'm glad it's a little blurry, because if you could get from a 3-minute video what I went to 3 years of law school to get, I'd feel really bad. Like, man, I should have just gone to YouTube
There were no cartoons.
University.
They didn't give us any cartoons in law school.
No, there was very few cartoons.
No
in law
SpongeBob,
school.
no pirates. Yeah.
No. So yeah, it's definitely a complex area, and you're right. And we've talked about before that as someone who deals with that side of things a lot with the YouTube video, what can I put in there, what can't I? So there's a famous case about the Prince song that somebody, I think that's probably what you were talking about, somebody put a video of their baby dancing in their kitchen and dancing to a Prince song that was like playing in the background on their like stereo. It wasn't like they overlaid that music as the music for the video. It was like that was the heart and content of the video was my cute kid dancing to Prince. And Prince's record label issued a takedown notice and said, you can't do that. We need a licensing fee for to use that song. And that to me is sort of pretty far on one side of the spectrum, that it's pretty clear that if a human being who understood copyright law was evaluating that case, they would say, no, this seems like a fair use here. This is a transformative use. It's only using the part of the song that's necessary. The purpose of it is to convey the baby dancing. There is no one who is going to think, oh, I want to hear a Prince song. I think I'll go pull up that video of the baby dancing. It doesn't replace the market for the song. So to me, insofar as fair use is ever clear cut, that's a reasonably clear cut case for it being permissible. The other side of the equation is that if you're looking, so I do this all the time when I'm trying to learn music. Someone says, oh, you should learn this song. We're going to play it at a gig. I go on YouTube, I look up the song, and there's a video someone has uploaded that's just like a picture of the artist and the song. And it's like free streaming of the song. And now that Spotify's around, you don't need to do it as much anymore. But this is a thing. It's all over YouTube. And it always sort of flummoxed me that if it's not the artist's record label putting this up, how the heck is this staying here? Because this is pretty clearly the only reason I'm on YouTube listening to this song is because I don't want to go out and pay to buy this song. But that's pretty clearly not a fair use. I mean, that's replacing the market for that song. And I think the reason it's up there is a combination of lax enforcement. There's just someone hasn't gotten around to it, and or an artist that made the qualitative judgment and said, I think I'm probably gaining more by having it up there than I'm losing.
Well, or they're monetizing it.
And
they're monetizing
but the artist isn't monetizing it if the uploader was not the artist's company.
Not true.
No,
so
yeah,
that's what I just discovered is
Yeah.
that I have a ton of my music is on YouTube and other people have put it up.
Oh, right.
Tons of it. And I just registered all of it with TuneCore for YouTube use and got paid for all of their plays. And now everything that mine on YouTube aims at me.
Yes.
Even the stuff that everybody else put up. And if someone puts up one of my tunes, I get a message from YouTube saying, someone put up one of your tunes, do you want to allow it to whitelist this paper or this tune, or do you want to tell them they can't use it? And if I don't do anything, it stays up and starts putting like 1/10 of a penny, for every 100 plays or something like that into my bank account. But they figured it out that now but I'm not like a big, well-known artist, and I think that when an artist is surrounded by more of a team, they have different angles at approaching this, and they want to not have corny videos of their songs out, and they have other reasons for wanting to control it. But for me, just being this like struggling indie guy it lives in Erie, Colorado, I'm like, yeah, it's cool. This guy got 60,000 plays on that song, and I don't know who that is. But that's coming from me wanting everyone to hear my stuff, and not coming from me going, oh, I'm going to choose who gets to listen to my stuff based on, I think it's still like a big scale of how that pans out, but for the little guy, I think it's worked out better now.
Yeah, and that's a pretty new thing. I guess I was thinking a couple of years ago. Yeah, exactly. But I think that's a great example of how, this is sort of what I was working to, is how technology can be used to bridge some of this gap. So what I was getting at is that there's this far side of the equation of the Prince YouTube baby that is pretty obviously a fair use, and then these sort of obviously not fair uses, and then there's this whole area in the middle that no one really knows what to do with. And that's, in my opinion, that's where the difficulty comes and where we ought to be focused, because I think the algorithms can take care of the sort of blatant stuff pretty easily. But it's that stuff in the middle ground that you actually need a human being to look at and think, well, I don't know. And the problem is it costs money to have a human being sit and stare at. How many videos are uploaded to YouTube every day? It's like, I saw the figure recently.
30 seconds.
Yeah, it's just crazy how many videos go up on YouTube, and someone they just physically can't actually screen all of those. But I think that's a great example of the technology coming into play to give you the decision as the artist, and let you have the say of, well, am I going to allow this or not, and then help you monetize it so that you have an incentive to allow it. The problem with that is that there is also an element of fair use for parody or uses where the whole reason why fair use exists as an exception to the copyright monopoly is to allow uses that the artist may not be comfortable with, right? So the classic example of this is, or a classic example, and the seminal court case about it, is Roy Orbison, Pretty Woman, famous song. A band did a remake of it, or not a remake, but did a new song called Pretty Woman that sampled the riff and played on the lyrics, and it was this band, Two Live Crew.
Not just any band, yeah, Two Live Crew.
Two Live Crew that hasn't really been around for a while, but if you were a 12-year-old boy in the mid-'80s, you were really into Two Live Crew because it's like the most filthy, profane,
raunchy,
raunchy rap. Like that was their reason for being. Is they're like, hey, we're gonna push this as far as it can possibly go. And so the audience of like 12-year-old boys just ate it up, loved it. And it just happened that I was in the sweet spot, so I remember that band. But it turns out they went up to the Supreme Court because the publishers of the song Pretty Woman, Roy Orbison, didn't like that his song was being used in a song about a prostitute and all this stuff, and so the Supreme Court had to decide whether that was a fair use or not. And the best part of it is I'm picturing, I clerked for the 10th Circuit Federal Court of Appeals in Denver, and so I know kind of how it works. The thought of the justices sitting around with their clerks, listening to the song and diagramming the lyrics, and having to have discussions about, so what do you think he meant when he said that there? Is that an artistic phrasing, or is that merely prurient interest? I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for those discussions. And they decided that it was a parody. Even though the underlying author, the artist, did not like what they had done with it, they said this is First Amendment protected, and this is parody, so we're gonna let it go. So there is a sort of additional class of use in fair use where we need a way for the technology to allow uses, even if the artist may say, no, I don't want to allow this.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's technology doesn't allow you to control it nearly. In the old days, when your music or video only got out through a defined distribution channel, you could control what went through that channel, and that was all the public could access. And now with the internet and social media, we can't control that access, can't control that distribution nearly as much. So I want to ask you guys about that and then see if anyone has questions as we're getting shorter on time. But I'm curious about, is that, because you can't control the distribution of your art, even if you said, I'm only going to put it on my YouTube channel, anyone can just repost that link, or anyone can grab a clip and repost it. As artists, do you feel like, well, great, my art is more out there and more people are seeing it? Or is it more, I can't control and I want to have more control over how it's out there and how it's seen?
I'll start if you want someone. For a while was really thinking about, okay, do I want to put this on YouTube first, or do I want to put it on SoundCloud, or maybe I shouldn't do maybe I won't put it on Facebook and all this kind of stuff. And there's no logic to that whatsoever, because people are just consuming however they prefer. And if you're ignoring one of these platforms for some reason because you don't prefer it, your own personal preference, I can't stand that, then you're just missing that. Those people that don't even know how to, I don't know how to use SoundCloud, I just look at stuff on Facebook and that type of thing. So I've found my own philosophy has evolved to the point where I don't try to judge the platforms, and I don't try to stop or control the flow. I just try to put out I put out stuff I can stand behind as my work, and then it could end up low res on Instagram, it could end up really HD, awesome, blah, blah, blah. This person's watching it with headphones, this person's only seeing it on Facebook where they kind of like cut the corners off of it and all that stuff. That was bothering me in the beginning, and now I'm to the point where it's just like, that's kind of the way, I have to accept all those things and or else it would bother me. But
and
if
I'd
rather just stop trying to guess where people are getting it from, and just know that like as many platforms as that I can get to, those are the platforms I need to reach.
For me, it's mostly context-based, as you said too. Like, I would have videos that I post on social media that I see as part of my artistic practice, would be mostly geared towards talking about the platforms that I'm working with normally, whether it's in forms of parody in terms of like the hashtags I'm using, as simple as that. I'm always very interested in subverting whatever tool I'm using or the kind of rules that I have to play by. And so the videos that I post on social media, generally, unless it's like a teaser for a larger project, I post it there. And then when I feel like the project is more appropriate for people to go to gallery and see it in exhibition screen, which is different from watching it on your computer or your phone, which is a very specific viewing, one-on-one individual experience, or screening, for instance, in a theater where we're all watching it together in the same room. I'm very aware of that. And so the pieces that I have for that would be more so, I wouldn't post it, like the whole clip online, because I know if everything I post online will probably be circulating somewhere. And there are those sites that oftentimes just rip all, like the whole platforms and then repost it. So like a lot of my videos do exist in different platforms, and I think that's just the nature of it. And I'm, especially for YouTube and Vimeo too, like I'm not paying a whole lot of subscription for it. I'm paying in terms of my privacy and data and information. And so I think for me, it's like, yeah, as long as I put it there, I voluntarily put it there. And so if it circulates, it circulates. And there's, it's too bad if it, yeah, I mean, we've recently experienced how horrible it is for noticingly information to leak. But I think, yeah, as long as you're aware that whatever you put on there might end up somewhere else you don't want it to be, whether it's your art or your personal photos, just be very conscious of it. And so for me, when I'm working with those distribution methods, I'm very conscious as of what I'm doing and what I'm putting up there.
So I just want to point out, this is a conversation that we've had before. So another time when the technology allowed us to start distributing music in a way that the artists really didn't get compensated for it directly, and they weren't able to control where it went, and the industry got really angry about this and everything. And this was in the 1930s when radio came around. Like there was, the same conversation happens every 30 or 40 years when technology sort of outpaces the copyright laws and sort of cultural norms around it. And there was talk of like, this is going to ruin live, no one is ever going to pay for a musician to play live again, because now, I mean, all they have to do is turn on this radio thing and like, and the argument against that was, but it's exposure. That by publicizing them on the radio, more people are going to come to their live performances. And so it's interesting that the paradigm in the 1940s was basically the same place we've come to again now, is the music we put out in the world in recorded form is basically to promote the forms that we can monetize, which are live performance, t-shirts. And it actually happened before that with player piano rolls, when people said, oh, no one's ever going to hire a pianist again. You just buy a piano roll and the piano will play it for you. It's the end of live music as we know it. This happens every 30 years. It happened with MP3, I don't know if it happened with 8 tracks.
Cassettes, because you could burn CDs.
Oh, right. Actually, yeah, we were talking about this in the car.
Copying cassettes.
Yeah,
so cassettes were the record killer. You were going to just tape everything and never buy another record.
Except they were able to find a compromise on that with the industries, evidenced by the fact that you could buy blank cassettes and you could buy double tape decks. Right. And I remember being totally confused by that, because it was like, I thought you're not supposed to copy this stuff, and yet I can buy in a regular store equipment that lets me do that. But they learned, because then when the next technology after cassette was supposed to be digital audio tape, DAT, they looked like cassettes, but they sounded way, way better, and they held more music, and like they were just generally better than cassette. And the industry managed to completely cripple them by putting a Copyright Act amendment in that required all DAT recorders to have copy protection circuitry in them that wouldn't let you copy them more than once. And that is effectively completely killed DAT. Then the entire industry became moot because MP3s came out and no one cared anymore. But there was a brief, we were talking in the car on the way up here, there was a brief period where it was like, it was an interesting time to be an audio engineer because it was like every month a new technology came and it's like, wait, no, mini disc. We're all going to mini disc now, you know?
And we were working at Windover.
Yeah, exactly. And then it was like a month later, I was like, no, forget mini disc. We've got this new thing here, and then
there's so many formats, and
it was crazy.
Very confusing.
And every company had their own version. It's like, oh, well, you're using the Sony mini disc, or using the Philips mini disc, or but that meant that the copyright worry managed to kill an entire technology at that point, so it's interesting. I mean, I think the whole question of how much control musicians or artists should have over their art once it leaves their hands, and whether that should be able to be monetized, is not one we're going to answer anytime soon. It kind of keeps coming up with the different technologies, and it's just different themes, variations on the theme.
And it's interesting, like how the formats will change, but how ephemeral data is, and what the laws will remain.
Well, and the laws haven't changed.
Yeah.
And that's one of
people's
the
bond, people's fears and
Right.
feelings about it will be there. Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the biggest problems I know Justin and I run into is that the law, I mean, the last time the Copyright Act was significantly revised was 1976.
Right.
Things have changed since then.
There's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act
Yeah.
right around 99, or 98, that sort of changed.
Sort of,
something.
kind of helped, but.
It was sort of a Band-Aid, and they said, oh, we'll fix this later, and then our political system broke.
That's a whole other panel, though. It's an entirely different panel. So obviously, we can keep sitting here and have this conversation all day. But before we do that, and we're getting the end of our time, if people have questions, we'd love to. Okay, people definitely have questions. Please.
I'm a painter, and I'm listening to this whole conversation, and there's a part of me that is, it's, fascinating, but it's also like, I think painters have these same conversations in the 1800s about copyright, and it's really interesting now that musicians and multimedia and working in the digital realm are having these discussions, and it's saying something about how your mediums are kind of changing, and they're becoming more visual in a way. It's a product of distribution, but it's a very interesting discussion. But I kind of feel like I hear these discussions like, well, we've had those discussions forever.
Right.
When photographs came around.
In painting, well, and pirated paintings are still an issue if they show up and it's a fake, and that's a huge crime now.
So my question now from a legal perspective is, I hear, you're saying, well, I'll put up something and then I'll get flagged, and it's like, oh, we can't, you gotta take that down. Well, that's just like getting a slap in the hand. But how many of these cases are actually getting to the courtroom, and how in real terms are copyright violations being treated? For example, if you put something up, or even in a painting's a little different because that's something that is existing on and on and on. I mean, you have to take it off the wall or burn it to get rid of the issue or change it. But if you violate a copyright, do you first get a letter? Like, does the court see if, well, did you, if let's say something I have is my copyright is violated, is the court going to say to me, well, before you will try your case, did you send him a letter and ask him to take it down?
Right. Well, so the question is about how the courts and how the legal system is treating infringement or takedowns, and we have basically what has happened is because of court cases in the early part of the digital age, specifically when YouTube got sued by Viacom for uploading all these TV shows and movies, we now have these content ID systems that Laura is talking about where you do get takedown. There's automatic takedown functions. And there's also a lot of times where, yes, lawyers are sending cease and desist letters. You must cease and desist from using that content. There isn't any legal requirement that a cease and desist letter be sent before a lawsuit is filed, but it's certainly a heck of a lot cheaper and quicker and easier. So it is certainly common practice that a letter is sent before a lawsuit is filed. There is a bit of divide, I think, between the YouTube, the takedown notices, which Justin just mentioned. We had something called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in 1998 that set up this notice and takedown procedure where, because a company like YouTube doesn't want to get sued for every person who uploads stuff to YouTube that is infringing, and the law says we will protect you, YouTube, if when someone uploads something infringing, and that the owner of that copyright work notifies you, you take it down. So we have this system where if I own a copyright work and I see it on YouTube, I can say, YouTube, that's mine, take it down. YouTube takes it down, no court needed. But the example of the Let's Go Crazy Prince song, what happened is that there was Prince's record label issued a takedown notice, and then there's what we call a counter notice, which says, no, that is legal, put it back up. And so the counter notice was issued, it got put back up, and then it went to court. So,
So I was going to say the broader question, though, outside of the DMCA and the YouTube or online content provider specific situation, in a general infringement, the thing I would keep in mind is that there's kind of two things to think about. There's infringement and there's damages. You might be infringing someone's copyright, but if there's no monetary damages to claim there, it's pretty unlikely it's going to end up going to court, because if there's no damages, at the end of the day, what are you going to get? You're going to get an injunction from the court saying, take it down. And they really haven't lost anything, right? I mean, it's like they've got to keep it up during that time, then okay, sorry, take it down. Maybe they had to pay some attorney's fees. So that's a huge factor that I think comes in the analysis initially. There is a way around that, which is registering your copyright. And this is, I said earlier, I don't want to get too far into the minutiae of copyright law here if that's not what people want to hear, but when you create a work and set it down in tangible form, you own the copyright in that work. You don't have to register, it's just yours, So when people say, oh, I'm copyrighting this, I always sort of grimace a little bit, because it's like, you already have a copyright. You're registering your copyright. It's an administrative thing you're doing to let the government know that you own this. You don't have to do it, though. But one of the reasons why you want to do it is that one of the benefits of having registered it is if you have registered it before someone infringes it, then you may be entitled to what's called statutory damages, which is essentially where you don't have to prove any monetary damage. You can just say, I was infringed, therefore court, give me some money. Well, now that's a bigger club to walk into your discussion with the other party to say, hey, guess what? You might be on the hook for 150 grand in statutory damages. I don't have to prove that I lost any money from this. And this is how, if you guys remember the recording industry of the RIAA lawsuits against downloaders, where they sued all these like grandmothers whose computers were used for downloading things, and like a couple of them went to court because everyone settled. And the ones that went to court ended up owing like $1 million for downloading like 12 songs. And the reason was they had registered this, the song owners had registered the copyrights in them, and so they could get statutory damages, and there's rules about when you can triple those damages and that kind of thing. And that's what drove the numbers up to the point where it was quite a big club they could hold against these people.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone really could just come in with a lawsuit right away and slam it.
If someone has a registered copyright, they can definitely file a lawsuit, and it gets very expensive very quickly.
Marvin Gaye's family just sued, was it Pharrell Williams, and what was that pop? It was like a pop song that just...
Robin Thicke.
Yeah, Robin Thicke, that cowbell was so obvious, and they won like millions of dollars.
And that was actually very controversial in copyright circles. So anyway, I know we had another, yes ma'am.
Can you recommend either a website or a guide describing all this copyright stuff for people in terms of layperson?
Can we recommend a website or a guide for copyright? No, you have to hire a lawyer.
Yeah, I would recommend paying a lawyer. I mean,
there's a lot, what I would say, and I definitely follow up, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of good information out there, and there's a lot of bad information. I once looked at the copyright page on Wikipedia, and it was wrong. So you have to know your source. There is a lot of great information. I think the actual source will depend on your media.
I would say try to find a blog or a chat group and find the guy who's typing in all caps. That guy probably knows what he's talking about. Don't do that. What I was going to say is, I mean, I always start, and this is funny, we also had this discussion on the way up that I saw this is slightly askew here, but I saw a paper about how kids growing up, the younger generation growing up right now, are really good at using Google to find information, but they're terrible at distinguishing good information from bad information. So you show them like an Onion satire article, and they can't tell you whether that's actual news or not. And so this is the problem with the internet, is finding the good stuff. So I always say, start with the primary source. Go to the uspto.gov. Or, I'm sorry, the copyright.gov.
Copyright.gov.
For the copyright website. Now, they have circulars. I can't remember if they call them circulars or publications, but they have these like 1 to 3 page little summary handouts. They're not like designed specifically for artists, but they're kind of lame, and they're not really for lawyers either. And that stuff's all, you know, that's accurate. I mean, it's not going to necessarily be specific to your situation, but they have a lot of circular, I think they call them circulars there, and fact sheets, circulars and fact sheets. And those are super useful. And then, you know, going to primary, then going to like, what's Lawrence Lessig's organization?
Stanford has the fair use.
Stanford has the fair use
project. Law firms and universities are more reliable.
Those are the good secondary sources.
And then one of the other things we do with Colorado Attorneys for the Arts. So if you are an artist in this room and you would like a copyright registered and you can qualify for a referral through CAFTA, we would be happy to connect you with one of our attorneys to accomplish that. But we also do workshops similar to this all over the state where we bring in one of our attorneys. Dave has done a dozen of them for us. And sometimes we just focus on intellectual property or contracts. And so while that may not be as nuanced to your specific situation, it can still help answer some general questions straight from an attorney's mouth.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the question is that a sculptor that found miniatures, reproductions of their sculpture in a shop somewhere that weren't licensed and were made internationally.
I mean, they should be so happy because that's great exposure. People will now come see them sculpt live.
Yeah, I mean, you basically have to follow the trail. I mean, unfortunately, that's a situation where you're calling CAFTA or you're hiring an attorney. Because it is definitely difficult to pursue those things on your own. A lot of times, just because they won't take you very seriously. It sounds like, I mean, if it is an exact replica, it certainly sounds like an infringement that is worthy of pursuit. And there's no takedown notice for that, right? So that's what our function is.
And the international part of it, there are treaties. Although this is U.S. copyright law we're talking about, but we have treaties with other countries. China's a tricky one. There's sort of rampant infringement there. But if it is, sculpture is actually specifically one of the categories named in the Copyright Act that's covered. So it's definitely covered by copyright. If it's a copy, if it's a total copy, then that's probably an infringement. Then the question becomes your remedy. Like, okay, how are we going to find these people? Are we going to have to go to China to get them? Maybe you can actually at customs seize imports. There's ways to do that. But that is actually when you want to hire a lawyer for. It gets complicated.
We're not self-promoting. It just is tough.
I don't know what else you do there.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
You briefly touched on this earlier. You were talking about just recording people's voices, and it kind of made me think about a Richard Prince exhibition that happened a couple years ago where he used images from Instagram, and it wasn't like these images were not for sale. It was all pretty much appropriation art. And so I'm curious, and I don't remember how that got resolved, and I know it was very controversial, but he wasn't using anything or any imagery that was used to sell anything. There was no monetary value attached to that. So I'm curious just your thoughts on, or maybe what the rules are around using stuff and using images that are on the internet that are so accessible that are not, don't have a dollar value attached to them.
So the question is about repurposing and reusing imagery from the internet not for monetary value. And I can tell you that I I can't even count the number of times someone said to me, well, yeah, that's copyrighted and I'm reusing it without permission, but I'm not charging for it, so that's okay, right? No, it's still copyright infringement. But what Justin kept talking about, has mentioned multiple times, is fair use, and it is a factor in fair use. But what's really relevant here, a number of things that have been mentioned before all kind of come together in this situation, because you own that, whoever took that photograph owns the copyright in the photograph, whether they've registered or not, and it is not, no one else can reuse it without permission.
Even if it's a personal photograph, even if it's not like a advertisement, it's just on their Instagram feed.
Yeah, so I mean, we say that you own a copyright as soon as you lift your pen from the paper. Whether you're an amateur or professional, it doesn't matter, you own a copyright as soon as it's recorded or fixed in some way.
What I'm asking
Yeah.
in reference to that Richard Prince exhibition is that the images that he reproduced were, just like images of like somebody's cat on Instagram. Like the images that he was using weren't copyrighted.
But that's the thing. The point is that when if I take a picture of my cat, I own the copyright in that picture immediately. Whether it sits on my phone and no one ever sees it again, I own the copyright in that picture. And if I were to take this pen and write a poem right now, and I put it in my pocket and no one ever saw it, I'd own the copyright in that poem. So anything that is copyrightable is protected by copyright as soon as it's created, whether it's for a commercial purpose or not. And so, and the Richard Prince issue, I'm not familiar with that particular matter, but when you take a copyrighted work and what's called a transformative use, when you change the purpose and nature of the use, that can influence the fair use nature of it. So it could have been, well, that picture of my cat is now, Richard Prince is known for altering the photographs and also maybe even making some cultural commentary on it, and that may have made it a fair use. But the copyright in the photo there is protected as soon as the photo is taken for any purpose.
Two real quick additional points. One is, again, think about the infringement versus damages issue. They probably didn't register that. I mean, I don't register the copyright in every photo I take of my cat. And so if they weren't actually damaged by it, it might be a situation where Richard Prince is kind of shrugging and saying, if you want me to take it down, go ahead and ask me and get a court to give me an order and I'll take it down, but I'm not gonna have to pay any damages. And the second thing is, don't get too myopically focused on copyright. There are other legal issues such as rights of privacy and publicity. So your cat probably doesn't have too much of a right of privacy, but although maybe that's the next big.
Well, there's the selfie. Yeah, the monkey selfie. Yeah.
Maybe cats have a right of privacy, but if you pull pictures off someone's Instagram and it's them on vacation, maybe like wearing a bathing suit or something like that, you get into some issues like, well, am I invading their privacy? Well, they made it public on Instagram, but arguably they only thought it was going to be publicized to a certain group of people. You get into a bunch of arguments there, but there's an issue. And then if the person is actually a somewhat famous person, then you get into this right of publicity issue that gets really thorny because it's different state to state, and we could do a whole panel on rights of publicity. But so anyway, and in fact, I have. Yeah. But the takeaway from that is like there's a range of issues. It's not just copyright you have to be thinking about.
So we are at the end of time here. So we will definitely hang out if anyone wants to talk afterwards. I want to thank Justin and Aaron and Laura and CAFTA for putting this on, and thank you guys all for participating.
Thank you.